it's just nice to share this with the folks. Hi, everybody. Dan Winter. I'm chatting with our SSP group friends. Alex will join us in a minute. I'm chatting with Matt. So Matt is interested in electrogravitics and has memories of the Nakwafin, right? Which would be parallel. I had some interviews recently with Tony Rodriguez, who has similar, I believe. You're probably aware.
Yeah, he and I are good friends.
Yes. He remembers opening the cover on one of the Mercury Vortex engines of the Nakwafin. So have you been working on the electrical interpretation? For example, our understanding was that if the angle of the iron powder doped Mercury vortex was correct toward centripetal center, the transverse EMF would be converted by compression into more organized longitudinal and therefore directional gravity.
The extent that I've determined, because I've been doing this all on my own, I haven't actually been conversing with too many people on the subject, and I'm still building my electrical science understanding, because what I remember comes from an alternate personality that worked in the programs. So I personally have limited information. So I'm having to use the information I find here to rebuild what I'm missing in my understanding.
That's kind of where we were going with Tony too.
Most of the electrical science work that I derive from that fits most closely to the German understanding of it is actually from Eric P. Dollard's work.
Oh, Eric, yes. Eric is just getting into the longitudinal interpretation. Tom Bearden worked out more specifically the equations for why the longitudinal EMF coherence component is effectively the gravity component. Oh, here's Alex.
Yep. Hey, Alex. How's it going?
So tell me, in terms of Eric's interpretation, does he describe it as that the longitudinal EMF is the gravity component?
He doesn't actually. I don't communicate with him. I've watched all of his YouTube videos that I could find. I own all of his books that he has published so far.
Is noble. He's noble. He's working with Aaron Ryriaki and the team in the Northwest. And well, go ahead.
What I'm aware of as far as he is concerned is that he doesn't even want to touch in the public eye this subject. So he doesn't talk about it. He talks about his ground antennas mostly. Are the projects he's focused on. He's touched on his earth field powered car briefly.
Right.
And that's about the only information I've been able to find that he will actually describe and touch on YouTube.
It's interesting when you're using the ground for power, if you're at a longitudinal node, which would be a magnetic line crosspoint, the vacuum energy devices work much better. So
if you notice, if you put a weighted pendulum by a tree that is growing on one of those nodes, and specifically it's when a tree is growing on one of those nodes, the closer you get to the tree, the less effect the Earth's gravity has on that weighted pendulum, therefore on you and all other objects.
That's a very useful very useful.
Yeah. I've made a lot of observations.
And the fact that Bruce Cathy showed reduced nuclear critical mass at those nodes, and Korotkov and Kozyrev proved military quality telepathy was only at those nodes. It all fits in with the longitudinal array interpretation. But Alex, so Matt and I just started to talk about his interest in electrogravitics. I don't know if that's what you had in mind for this evening, but
I'm an open book. We sent out invitations to everyone, and we'll see who comes aboard. I got at least 3 more patients with whether they show. Let's see, and then you could just take it wherever you need to. And I just love listening to you and being a student of the laws and principles of Europe. I consider myself and would love to study with you long term. That's my deepest wish. So I just
Well, just for our audience here, Alex has introduced us to many of the secret space program survivors, including Johann Fritz and others, and we've had wonderful fun over the years. So it's always a delight to meet his friends and team. So I see Sarah has joined us. Hello, Sarah.
Hi. Alex, thank you for organizing. I'm so happy to be here. I made it. Great to meet you all.
We're just we were chatting about a little bit about electrogravitics. Just so you know, we are recording. The idea is to make something teachable out of this. But
Sure.
But please,
No,
Sarah,
your teachings have been very helpful, so I don't mind.
But Sarah, tell us your interest or expertise regarding the SSP projects, et cetera, if you would.
Sure. Well, I know that I'm connected to all that somehow, but when I first looked at your YouTube channel, after Alex had sent me a couple videos, Flame in the Mind was just like, oh, okay, this is somebody that I really need to connect with, because I really think that we need to reverse engineer the experiences of people who are somehow connected to SSP, the UFO phenomena, paranormal in general. And a lot of the things that you speak about in your teachings, I have experienced, but don't really know how to explain. And I'm very fascinated in being able to speak about these things from the perspective of, a physicist, scientist, especially an engineer. So that's where I come in. Where I fit, I don't really know, but
the Flame in Mind
conversation.
flameinmind.com essentially will measure when the ratio between the frequencies of your brainwave, particularly the alpha to gamma cascade, when those harmonics like tensors, like Tinker Toys, line up in golden ratio, it means basically enabled compression. And if there's also an octave component in that series, you're able to teach kids to see without their eyes. It enables bliss. And it also then at higher amplitudes is how John Charles Moyen famously bilocated with witnesses, which is basically a compression phenomena into the longitudinal array. And that's actually what I think is behind what Matt was just chatting about when you're next to the sacred tree on the sacred site, the gravitational effect is less because there's a separate set of centripetal forces.
That tree is actually creating that force with its rings.
Yeah.
And if you can, if you bring a thermal imaging camera, or even better yet, an electric field imaging system, you will see that spiral field coming up the center of the tree. And
even more simply, with the same flameinmind.com life force measure using the same brainwave spectrum analyzer, sensing 1 microvolt and spectrum analyzing the infrasound, the tree's harmonic is picked up the same way we pick up brainwave harmonics in the same spectra. And you can tell which tree is going to live or die based on whether the Schumann harmonics are imploding there in their infrasound, which is exactly the power spectra of brainwaves during bliss, meaning both are basically implosive capacitance. That's the point. Yes, exactly. But Sarah, did you have any particular experience then in the technical or SSP areas yourself, or?
Yeah, I mean, my interest right now is really on the light body and the reconstruction of that as it relates to any sort of what's the word that I want to use? Dark forces hijacking, things like that. I'm going through a pretty intense healing process myself that is a military operation, but not one that I would consider to be secret to me. So I really try to focus on the positive aspects of any sort of secret program out there as it relates to me. I know I'm connected to a lot of different parts, but I know that there's a really great group that I'm connected to that is working to help, not only heal me, but heal others in the planet. And trying to use my words carefully also. And it really has to do with plasma and flame in the mind, and providing that to me and really taking out negative energies in a sort of an operation that is a team environment, but it's pulled out from different dimensions, if you will. So, I mean, how that, I'm just involved, I'm just embodying the process and learning as I go, but how that can really be explained and translated and broadcast to other humans, I think is really important. And it all makes sense. I just am not the scientist here.
Well, we do have now some fairly meaningful beginnings of electrical description. So when your body has enabled compression, for example, bliss in brainwave power spectra, or even EKG coherence, that compression enables, during the compression, the vortex converts the transverse EMF at the center of compression into coherent longitudinal array, measurably enabling lucid dreaming, as we know from Therify.net, which makes longitudinal coherence. And that ability to propagate coherently longitudinally in the compressional array brings up the question of, is that node of compression what is called a soul, and can a soul be stolen? Which is the introduction to parasite, astral hygiene. And I think there is an answer to that as well, that the theory would be that if you can generate your own bliss, your own implosion, and the compression precedes radiance, then that very compression phenomena at the center, that implosion of charge at center, is specifically the negentropic, that which sorts. And so once you're able to generate that source of bliss, the shareable wave only will make it through the center, which means that parasites are toasted. That's the theory. And if you have enough bliss, you do toast the parasite. So, that's, and having a language for exactly what is a soul can redeem a civilization. Actually, now we know why the ancients said you do not have a culture unless you can teach your young people how to have bliss, because otherwise they don't lucid dream and they don't make it through death.
Yeah. If I wanted to clarify on what you're referring to when you're talking about the charge compression, because I'm self-taught, I use different vocabulary. So correct me if I'm wrong. The way I'm seeing what you're referring to in my head is, if I were to convert that to an analog, it would literally be water hammer in a hydraulic system, which would be closer to, in an electrical circuit, could be reproduced with a spark gap system, much like Nikola Tesla's with the modern day. I was referring to his stout copper bars prototype, what is being called today as his hairpin circuit.
Yes, but essentially the key is that when the power spectra of the arc is not just an infinite series, because almost any arc is an infinite series, usually based on an octave series, but in certain geometries of carbon arc, for example, a fullerene, that power spectrum will also have a golden ratio or conjugate component. And then you get the implosive centripetal, which converts the transverse to the longitudinal. Visualize a caduceus visualize a vortex whose side view is a caduceus. That's why there is a frequency signature which identifies that ability to implode, called a phase conjugate pump wave. A good example is the Schumann harmonic cascade, which is brainwave bliss infrasound, and that is a phase conjugate pump wave. It's implosive. It's how the pyramids made the power that was a global wireless power grid called the Hummer, by pumping out a longitudinal component into the array, actually. The frequency signature and the nodes.
The way I use that.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
The way I use that in my personal meditation is through breathing technique. I will actually compress my stomach and push that fluid up, creating a compression wave towards my pineal gland.
Absolutely perfect.
And with a hydraulic compression wave in the spine, it also compresses the charge in there.
Exactly. That's called the sacrocranial tidals. And the 0.1 hertz is a golden ratio exponent of Planck. And that whole frequency cascade of the sacrocranial spinals, all is golden ratio times Planck. And that's the physics of Kundalini. That's exactly. And the breath is the perfect way. So we're in perfect agreement. Exactly. Well, cool. Should we say hi to Arkheim here? Who joined us, Arkheim?
Hi, Arkheim.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Alex told me that there'd be various wizards joining us. I'm curious of what your wizardry is, Archive.
What my what?
What your expertise in this regard is.
I'm just a lowly person who can't remember what they actually are, where they actually come from, that gets kidnapped. That's really how I am. Like, I guess that's talking down on myself. I mean, I know I have a power inside me and that they're continually trying to take it from me. It's funny that you're talking about bliss and how it sounds to me like obviously people are more in control of themselves and more able to evolve and descend if they are in a blissful state. And it's funny you mention that, because I am realizing that these groups that kidnap me do more than just, they're doing these things behind the scenes to emotionally manipulate those of us who are in these programs, to try to keep us in a lower emotionally, like in a lower vibrational state, so that it's easier for them to control us. Like if we were in a higher state and we're able to step into our power, then I mean that kind of makes things a lot more difficult for them. And I've just been realizing it's absolute insanity. Like the things that they're trying to do. Like, this is going to sound a little bizarre, but just this morning, we woke up and my partner has 2 guinea pigs and I have a cat. So obviously there's precautions we have to take, because I have a cat, cats will do what cats do. He doesn't seem too interested in eating them, but still, we try to be careful. Well, this morning, I can't tell you how on top of taking care of these guinea pigs my partner is. This morning, the cage was open. The cage was wide open. And no one in the house that I live in would have done that. Like, and the cat wouldn't be able to do it. Like, and I still can't understand why, but my theory is they were hoping, they took me, somebody did that intentionally, hoping that the cat would eat one of the guinea pigs and it cause this traumatic event in our lives that would push us into a lower vibrational state. Because I can't tell you how much my girlfriend both loves her guinea pigs and my cat, right? And if that were to happen, she wouldn't be able to look at my cat the same ever again. It just would have been this really traumatic thing. And I can't help but feel like that was a little Easter egg they left me, like a fuck you. Like,
but, our hypothesis, Archive, is that the major drama of who Elena Dedan calls the Nebu, the Greys and the Dracos, is basically they lost long-term memory, which means they lost a soul, which means they lost the ability to propagate coherently, longitudinally, implosively from the genetic, basically what we call soul. So, for example, who they abducted for Montauk were all the lucid dreamers, and who the Greys abducted after Griata was all the lucid dreamers, meaning probably you have something of extreme value, namely a certain kind of coherence. For example, are you a lucid dreamer?
I don't remember my dreams extremely well. And then there's also like, I get taken a lot at night. And so I always have to go through my dreams and figure out what's real and what's just dreams that I'm having.
And did you have ancestors that had certain skills or qualities? We'd call them psychic grandmothers or anything like that, or
yeah, my dad's a shaman. He's what we would call schizophrenic. He's just a shaman.
Yes,
you know what I mean. And so I come from
that's in my house a lot.
Yeah, interesting. My graduate psychophysiology professor Albert Axe was studying the brain chemistry of schizophrenia, and then I knew Kundalini Psychosis or Transcendence author, who basically was hypothesizing that Kundalini misinterpreted was often called schizophrenia, but in effect, when your aura is imploding, more than one plasma entity can inhabit unless there is an implosive point, which sorts, basically. So in effect,
I think you say that you're saying essentially that more than one soul can inhabit a human body.
Well, that's why I knew my graduate professor, one of the inventors of the word biofeedback, Albert Axe and Elmer Green, he thought we should be able to find schizophrenia by studying brain chemistry. And I beg to differ. I think if you could see whether there's two plasma vortexes or one inhabiting a body, then you'd have a clue.
My personal experience with schizophrenia, because I have many family members that have it, every one of them, if you work through it, and some of them, if you put them through, I'm losing the word here, that induced state where you can talk to their subconscious.
Yeah.
If
Hypnotic regression.
you
Mhm.
Yes, that if you do that, you find out all the voices they're talking to are actually alternate personalities, most of which are created through extreme trauma
Yeah.
because of the programs.
Which is
Yeah,
how
it
they
should-
split personality.
They do that on purpose. The purpose of the alternate personalities is for information control.
And splitting the
They're
soul,
able
basically.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, so to speak, yeah.
And you know how Ken Page, multidimensional cellular healing, was healing the Montauk abductees in that regard. He was using muscle twitches to talk to the various entities in the body, and there would be this negotiation. It's kind of a famous story. You know, you're talking to the inhabiting ghost, and then the inhabiting ghost says, "Well, I will leave if you can tell me who I am." And Ken Page famously answered at one point, "Well, you are the twinkle in my eye." and the ghost says, "Oh, you're right. Bye."
Right.
Usually I combat those simply with grounding.
Yeah.
If you pay it, if you notice, if you electrically ground yourself, they're sucked in. This is where the age-old concept that Westerners believe that witches couldn't cross streams. It's because, and it's not witches, it's people who are possessed.
Yeah.
And it's because those entities are only entering this plane through that electrical sheet that covers the earth. It's literally like less than a millimeter over the surface that's recharged every time lightning strikes the earth. And they can't cross grounded structures. So if you ground yourself, I mean, they're sucked right out, or they run away. And that experience, and that's why people who experience, if you pay attention, literally everyone who experiences psychosis, most of the time, medical professionals like EMTs and stuff will find them in the shower.
Right.
And not in a bath, but with running water, because that water is grounded, and then it's grounding through the drain. And as soon as they leave, it starts all up again, because the entity's standing there waiting.
Because basically the perfect ground is reference to perfected charge distribution. So that's very wise and useful. In fact, to such an extent that even though Therify.net is famous for releasing ghosts, and we think we understand the physics, because implosion is what puts them back into the array, but also the release of ghosts, we recommend the book Earthing to everyone who tries the plasma. But Alex, I think you were saying something. We missed you.
Oh, couple of things. First of all, Dan, I love your work. However, I just would request maybe because we're not scientists, so I always love what you hear, but I kind of have to distill it, and I don't want to confuse the scientific terminology, for stupid language. So in other words, perhaps you could distill it down in civilian terms. Some of the scientific expression.
He's asking
Which,
Dumb it down, Dan.
he's asking you to use Muggle vocabulary.
Well, the key term there probably was what I call the phase conjugate pump wave. If you visualize the harmonic content of the Schumann cascade, 3 hertz, 8 hertz, up to 20, 30, that cascade, if you graph the peaks, looks like the perfect caduceus. And the name for that in physics is called a phase conjugate pump wave. And the ideal of that is exact golden ratio multiples times Planck, called PlanckFire.com, Cause of Gravity and Consciousness, the title of my new book, PlanckFire.com. That's what a phase conjugate pump wave, and that's exactly what the Schumann harmonics do, and exactly the same frequencies in the brain waves that cause bliss. And that implosion causes grounding, which is access to the reference of perfected charge distribution, basically.
Let me ask you, for somebody, what Matt was talking about, and a lot of the SSP abductees who've been fractionated, their souls have been fractured, or their aura, more importantly, like you always speak to having a wholeness in your aura. If people have holes in their aura, what would be the best? I mean, obviously live food and things like that, but what would be the practices to increase the aura or repair the auric field?
Or
I don't believe diet would help with reintegration at all. What you're doing is trying to reintegrate the parts of your brain, the parts of your consciousness that your brain is an antenna for, back into one wholeness, and they're fighting you over that. They are their own consciousness at this point, and they're making their own decisions. They're not mindless entities anymore. They're you. Each of them is you, separated from the whole.
Yeah, the keyword being separate.
They're making the same. Yeah, they're making the same decisions you would have made if under the exact same conditions. So that proves that they're part of your personality. It's just there are walls in place.
Yeah,
and each of you are creating those walls together. So you have to work together to they have to want to integrate in order for you to integrate them.
Interesting. Well said.
Sarah, I am that I am that I am.
Which means ability to self-refer, basically. But
so you have to create a dialogue with them, get to know them, create trust. They have to trust you in order to want to integrate.
And a lot of times your alters don't like you. They think that you are the lowest rung of the ladder, that you're the stupidest version of you, that you're the lowest common denominator. And why would I integrate with you? I'm out here in space, walking through portals, re-engineering reality, while you go like you live a normal life and are, it took you how long to figure out what's happening to you? Like they don't respect you. And that's the hardest part is not only creating a dialogue, but also just getting them to understand that you are one and the same, and that them disrespecting you is them disrespecting themselves, because you are the same person. It's difficult not only for us as cover alters to understand that we are our alters. I think it's also difficult for them to grasp that, even if they know that on a intellectual.
Oh, right when it got good.
Oh, Archime, you got muted. Archime?
Archime, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Archime?
I don't think you can hear us.
Can you unmute? Unmute.
You've been muted for the last 15 seconds.
Hello?
Yeah, just repeat.
You've been muted for the last 15.
Repeat the last 15 seconds.
Oh.
You
got to repeat everything you just said. That wasn't getting really good.
Just 15 seconds. The last 15 seconds.
What was I saying? What were we talking about? We're talking about
just that your alters
to clarify. I think to clarify what you were referring to, which I agree with, most of your alters are not going to trust you. They're not going to respect you. They're going to fight you every step of the way. They're not even going to see you as one person, as part of them. They see themselves in most cases as their own person, and they see you as the invader. And this way, in a lot of cases, there's a fight where you'll see switching going on between alters, because they see themselves as the alpha in the group, the original, when they may not be. So yeah, and that's not the case with every single time, but from my personal experience, that is the case the majority of the time.
The only time that I've ever had an alter that was just stoked about integrating with me, his name's Marshall Howard. And they use him he doesn't have very much ability or anything like that. He's not used for time stuff or anything like that. He always lives normal lives, and he's either like in the programs in the breakaway civilizations, and he's usually either a miner or a construction worker. And he's the only one who's just like really happy to integrate with me. And we started talking because he lives on this planet that I don't know if this is the civilian name for it or not. I'd have to be in communication with them, but Centurion 5, he lived on this planet, and he just started telling me about what life is like there. And he actually was communicating with me about how he thought we had a lot of privilege on Earth, because on Centurion, it's kind of like the World Economic Forum's vision of like having like 15-minute cities you can't leave and stuff. They have that in place there, and they're eating like cricket pastes, like this weird food that they give them and stuff. But I had a really interesting conversation with him, and he actually came to the front and started talking to my parents and asking them about Earth and what life is like here.
Oh. I think Sarah wanted to say something before about.
Oh, a couple of things came up. I want to go back to the grounding topic.
Yes.
But first I just want to address this whole conversation around, the fragmented parts of our soul and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, I think that this whole process that we're going through individually and collectively, probably galactically, I don't know, is really the ultimate reconciliation. And it comes from both sides. And this is where I really see everything from the perspective of somebody that's actually embodying that process, right? Because the reconciliation has to happen energetically as well. And we have all of these polarities that we're trying to work with. And actually that interview that you were doing, Arkeem, am I saying your name right?
Yeah, that's correct, Arkeem.
So that conversation that you were having that I listened to on YouTube recently was so beautiful, because you were really addressing the polarities in just this community. And because let's face it, if you have a strong opinion about something, you're compromised, you're biased, unless you can realize that you're biased and get, even more extreme about your judgment of your own bias. You know what I mean? But it's all about the awareness, I feel. And so I don't know, something happened to me when I really started arguing with those other parts of me and really getting upset. I was just looking through my journals this morning and just thought, wow, the language I was using with them, because I've come to realize that it's a two-way street. And what we're really going through in terms of engineering this whole healing process is completely unheard of. It's never been done before. And everybody involved is doing things that are unprecedented, if you will. And it's a relationship that really needs to be nurtured and fostered, because it's either spiritual warfare or it's the ultimate love story from my perspective. And that plays out energetically and in all the graphics you show, Dan. I mean, that's what I'm really into, is being able to understand everything from kind of a higher light level. To
Exactly.
me, it looks like it's all digital. It looks like computer animations to me, and around me and inside of me, as if I'm in a simulation. But I understand that it's the everything that we're trying to get to. But first we have to go through the big, the therapy sessions.
Well, implosion is how the soul is fused. That's really, but Alex, you wanted you wanted to say one more thing. Alex, did you? Oh,
Yeah,
now you're muted, Alex. Alex?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Principles that are, not timeless, but do you see any between like the pre-2012, at the end of the Mayan calendar, and now? It's clearly that we are, if not in a different sector of time, like the entire physical and three-dimensional parts of Earth are through the photon.
That's appropriate to discuss. I mean, I'd like to try to now set a little context here. People that are not familiar with the SSP program need to understand one thing, that many, if not most, of the SSP experiencers, including, I think, our friends here to some extent, that the quote unquote bad guys, the Nebu, whoever's stealing and abducting, they have a classic technique, which is to use trauma to essentially fractionate your memory into little compartments and then use separate compartments. And literally, the important point here is that what they don't have is a unified soul. that's why the Dracos lost long-term memory, and that's what the Greys don't got. So, which means they don't have the ability to actually take memory through death or lucid dream, which means they can't steer the time chair at Montauk, for example.
I personally don't agree with that, but I'd like to hear your more detailed explanation on it.
That may be a little too general, but many, if not most, I think, of the more parasitic species, what again Elena calls the Nebu, I think the thing that's valuable to them, obviously, as we've said many times, is Earth DNA. And the part of Earth DNA that's worth trading is the part that's able to make a soul. A clue to that is, which one of your children can lucid dream, which means they have a coherent longitudinal light body specifically. And when that body is split up, they can use parts of it to make more money. But in fact, the key is for us to recognize what reassembles the soul. Pull yourself together, Joe. It actually is a very specific kind of physics. And I'd like to use the example of when my partner at that time, Gomati, was a meditation teacher in Germany and the US. And I said, well, what's the most common reason that students come to you to learn meditation? She says, people have huge holes in their aura from using too many drugs. That's the reason they come to her to learn meditation. Well, this was her. And holes in the aura effectively mean when you have chemically induced bliss, there's asymmetry in the implosion, which is similar to what you're describing as what happens during that trauma. So the implosion that was holding your memory together, a central reference point of compression from which all perspective is referenced, that centripetal force is what you call soul. And that's what holds your aura into one coherent longitudinal Ba-from-the-Ka or Kesjan body or rainbow light body, which is specifically determines how far you go in the lucid dream and how valuable your DNA is in the trading, is a trading commodity. So the process of learning meditation, which is actually the process of learning bliss, creates a fusion possibility as centripetal force. So anything that would increase the centripetal force, for example, meditating on a magnetic line cross, meditating on sunrise, sunset, getting golden ratio harmonics in your brainwave, doing the caduceus fire breath, doing the Mayer wave breath. All these are elements of inducing centripetal force and creating that fusion. And in the center of that fusion then is the beginning of possible sorting. Now, I think what Sarah brings up is also very valuable, and Matt also here, that, well, there's also a conversation that has to happen as parts of your souls gets fused, like, well, there's the part of me over there that was doing something on the other side. And so integrating those memories, and I can't say exactly that I have experience with that, but I'd like to say one thing, that after I started having intense Kundalini for, 20 years or something, the first thing that happened to me was I basically cried for like 2 to 3 months. I can tell you that. I'm not even sure I knew why I was crying, but I was definitely crying, I can tell you, which it effectively means in some way that every thought you ever had that was not perfectly shareable, that was not of service to all, and that was not pure principle, needs to get sorted first. And that can be called weeping, but it's a compression phenomenon.
Really.
And my personal experience with that is I did strobe one of my chakras one time, and this was an extremely violent event where you feel this field from the chakra expand out, and it's like it's getting denser as it reaches an apex and then comes back down towards the chakra, and it's just this pumping action at a specific rate. It speeds up as it hits an apex and then comes back and slows back down as it hits the chakra, speeds up, and it just keeps doing this. And when it was doing this, and that's what I call strobing, when it was doing this, it was so violent and intense, it actually shot me out of my body. And that was the first time I had a full-on out-of-body experience, which was an interesting story in and of itself. For another time, I guess.
But there might be some parallel to what we believe may be the world's most powerful bliss binaural beat, Flame and Sound at mind.com, which some of the Monroe people said golden ratio drove me out of my head. Well, actually, implosion is how you plasma project. So in effect, when the squeezing is complete, that implosion is what allows the longitudinal coherence to propagate. So that does kind of fit the physics. That what you're referring to as a pumping is specifically in perfect form, a phase conjugate pump wave, which means the perfect phase conjugate pump wave is a forest under a magic tree, which is right where our conversation started.
Yeah. When this happened to me, I was just getting started in doing chakra energy work. And basically I was just creating balls and stuffing them in the chakra, in my navel chakra. And it reached a certain point where it couldn't store anymore. And it just suddenly overflowed. When it overflowed, it did that violent pumping action and shot me out of my body.
And if you had been well grounded at that moment,
I probably wasn't at all.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So
the grounding.
Yeah, electrical grounding.
Yeah.
Like with a electrical mat, or even just sitting in the grass.
Yeah. Barefoot in the mud is good. Or you know, read the book Earthing.
The wetter, the better.
There you go. And you know, there's differences in quality of ground too. There's some places where you have a better ground than the other, because basically a ground for electricians and psychologists means access to fractality, access to perfected charge distribution, where every wave is tested for what's shareable.
And if you notice those superior points on the earth of grounding and of energy field coherence, you'll find sacred sites there. Exactly. Especially with here in the Americas, with the Native Americans, it's like a nodal point where there are these force lines that traverse and cross each other, and the Native Americans used to use them as phones.
Well, yeah,
you could literally sit at one site, and another person would sit at another site somewhere else, and you could literally telepathically link with each other through the Earth grid.
And that's what we've been talking about for years as the Korotkov and Kozyrev work. But, you know, in Australia also, they call them song lines. The point is now, you know, Kozyrev said, measure the nanotesla of flux density at the magnetic line cross before you set up the Kozyrev mirror. So we can talk a lot about the physics of the enabled telepathy of the longitudinal node. That's exactly where we're going with this. So exactly.
And if you notice, Nikola Tesla was actually, all of his magnifying transmitters he was building were on those nodes.
He tried, but you know, when he put the light bulbs out on the field to light them at the distance, I don't think he understood the longitudinal nodes right there. And by the way, he didn't have the frequency.
He was still learning.
That's right.
He was still learning.
And when
he knew later on in life, after he lost the financial ability to do all that, I believe by his death, he had a full understanding. But when he was still learning.
Yeah.
Those were experiments.
When he chose 60 cycle, it was fatal. 50 cycle, you can do a longitudinal. 60, no way. You can't even grow fullerenes with 60 cycle. Never.
I would even imagine using what are those 9 frequencies?
Well, it's actually, they're all golden ratio exponents of Planck. That's what it is. That's why fullerenes are conjugators. And you rotate a conjugator, you got the energy and propulsion to make this planet look like the Stone Ages. It's the old story. That's what carbon nano's about. But we have somebody else that joined us here. We have Eve and Sirve.
Two other people.
Yeah. Alex, unmute. Alex, we can't hear you.
Sirve and Eve, if you can, and our company can get your videos online, that would be great. Introduce yourself and why you're here.
But just, you know, Alex told me some very magical talents were joining us, and I'm just interested to learn what magical talents have just joined us. That's all.
Main obscurity.
Oh, well, that's okay. Well, but just to finish that thought, so the idea is that the reason the longitudinal nodes, where the pyramids and all the Gothic cathedrals and labyrinths, that they were at a place where the longitudinal radio works. So the physics of how a longitudinal array works is absolutely behind everything we're talking about, whether it's remote viewing, action at a distance, bilocation portals. It's all about the compression nodes of the longitudinal array. And remember, when physics says that action at a distance is entanglement, what they don't know that entanglement perfected is called phase conjugation. And what they call an Einstein-Rosen bridge is actually the nodes of a longitudinal array to enable impedance matching, which is the absolute physics of impedance of action at a distance, and literally how you could contain heat at a distance, the holy grail of fusion research, et cetera, and how Flame in Mind got named after Ingo Swann lit a flame with his mind at a distance through a Faraday cage. Now we know the frequency signature to do that, and it's implosive compression to enable longitudinal propagation. That's what it is. It's not a mystery.
Question about that, please. This is like the perfect thing that I want to break down, these lines of communication, if we could, and how that really works, because I think it's happening to more and more people, you know, seeing the writing on the wall, if you will, clairvoyantly, or these projections that come out from the mind floating in front of you. So, because I know that it's all related, right? If you can lucid dream, you have these certain abilities to talk to your ancestors and whatever.
Exactly.
I think it was, I can't remember which video I saw, but you were talking about the ball of lightning and how that can be telepathic. So I was really activated, you know, all this happened back in 2014 when a blue ball the size of a beach ball rolled into my apartment. And
it liked you. It liked you.
It liked me. It hung out with me for about 24 hours, and I looked at it, and it put me in a trance. I mean, I was seeing it clairvoyantly, because I think I've always had that ability and just had forgotten really how to use my eyes. But it sent me a couple of very high def pictures when I would close my eyes, like I was watching a high def TV. And the first image that I saw was a basketball game. All the players were wearing gold and violet, and this all symbolic. I have a long lineage of like mediumship on my mom's side. So I thought I was just opening up in that way. I never thought about anything off planet. So the first image was the game being played. The second was a rotary phone ringing. And then the third image, and I can't believe I didn't put it together, was the scene from the movie E.T. where Elliot's on his bike and E.T.'s in the basket, and I heard phone home. And then for the next 3 months, every time I would close my eyes, I saw the lines of connection. I mean, I was going through beautiful star systems and black holes, and like the telecom system was being created. And ever since then, I've been able to receive these transmissions, and there's a vortex floating in front of me right now where the healing energy is coming through, and, you know, other things. But, you know, this has got to start happening to other people soon. You know, I think on a larger scale, it's going to start happening to many, many people, right? I mean, I don't know. And how does that really happen, and what does it mean?
I would like to just real quick clarify a little understanding I have on the orbs themselves, not really on the total subject, but my experience with the orbs is that it's just like our own biofield is a sphere or a toroid, and what you're seeing is a very low resolution. You're just seeing the outer sphere of that being, and whatever shape that being is taking is actually inside that sphere. So you're not when that happens to me, it's like it takes a while. If you really focus through it and allow your third eye to adapt, you start to see what that being actually looks like, and you stop seeing the sphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think those are very useful description. I particularly love your story about the blue orbs there. I think that's fabulous. It reminds me of Andromeda and Blue Sphere Alliance. But specifically, when we, in terms of an electrical engineer commenting, when we have taught young people to get that golden ratio cascade in their brainwave, and then with their eyes blindfolded, they see a vortex form inside their head, a tube, literally. And then they see the tube comes to a point, and if they compress that point, then that tube becomes an eyeball, and then they can see without their eyes. Notoriously, and shocking to Western countries, but taken as normal in Eastern countries. At the same time, those same kids frequently start seeing their ancestors. Now,
Are you referring to that tube right here that goes to the center of the brain?
well,
Because I see as a whole, when I look at myself through my third eye, I see a physical hole right here that goes all the way to the center of my brain.
It's great. And remember that many of the children, that vortex tube starts out a bit asymmetrically, but then as they tilt their head and get focused, eventually it takes on more symmetry and becomes more centripetal, until eventually that is a vice-like grip, as in mind meld with the Queen Mother.
I've heard you discuss that before. How do you develop that further?
Well,
like, what are the techniques you know?
Well, and this is where talking about the interference becomes very interesting because
right.
I think we're completely set up to not be able to ground and to not be able to steer our tornado.
I think Alex wants to say something.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just, we have to the whole upgrade of the AI, the artificial intelligence that's as Johan said, is literally gobbling on anything organic in this sector of the galaxies.
Yeah, the black goo. Yeah, but let's get back to the principle here. So the principle is that when your brainwave harmonics become implosive and your brain becomes increasingly centripetal, that is basically the only definition of power and the only way to steer any tornado. But what that's adding density to the vortex, literally a plasma vortex, which eventually, after it's coherent, you can take with you out of your body, lucid dreaming, remote viewing, and at death, what's called a soul. And the ability to stabilize that compression node, the rainbow light body, Kesjan body, or the Ba from the Ka, is the sustained inertia of compression to hold that node to center. And the way in which communication is enabled is at the center of that vortex, whether inside you or inside that ball lightning, is a compression point where there's impedance matching to the still point of the nodes of a longitudinal array, literally DNA radio. And so the still points of compression, and only the still points of compression in the longitudinal array where they put the pyramids, et cetera, and the only places military telepathy was measured, enables, what happens is that because of the impedance matching to that compression at the still point nodes, the ping pong balls bouncing between those nodes start up a harmonic series, which are golden mean ratio multiples times the speed of light. So every longitudinal array is not the same Stargate. The Stargate at the center of Orion in the trapezium has been the subject of the Orion Wars for tens of thousands of years because there's more compression there. So, but the beginning of any portal is a compression to the still point in the longitudinal array, the nodal point. And what you're calling clairvoyance here is the fact that your aura has set up enough coherence via compression to stabilize into that array and literally modulate and demodulate the nodes bouncing between those center nodes, meaning that you have now, because of the compression is stable inside you, you can bounce in and out of that compression node called clairvoyance, where someone's aura who is only transverse and not longitudinal, not compressional, will not be able to perceive that weak electrical compression node we call clairvoyance. So, and the same has to do with why ghosts are released, because we know that successful death requires a black hole experience called Heinrich-Klüver constants, and that if you don't compress well at the moment of death, then the plasma, the residuals, are not able to embed and distribute in that array called the collective unconscious. And the reason things like Therify are helpful for releasing ghosts, although a human in bliss is better, is that enables the final compression moment that enables distribution into the array. They call it going toward the light. So it is all about reaching the critical mass of compression, which says the hygiene for dying, that death in electrosmog hospitals is literally hell, and death in the center of a sacred stone circle is heaven, because heaven is the name for charge distribution enabled.
One thing I've noticed since I started studying biogeometry, I've started to see longitudinal waveforms and transverse waveforms in a different light. I've noticed that transverse waveforms seem to take on the form of the energy from the higher densities, what I call, most people call them dimensions. I feel that they're more promptly, accurately called higher densities because through longitudinal wave propagation, you can re-enter those higher densities, which continues the electromagnetic spectrum, but into a density that's out of phase with our own and is propagating faster than what we're able to observe with our testing equipment, which stops at what we refer to as the speed of light.
Well,
past that, the electromagnetic spectrum does continue, but at a like that's a point where the density is just suddenly magnified greatly and changes the factors of the spectrum from that point onward. And I've been told by higher beings that there are further and further density boundaries that electromagnetic spectrum does continue, and its nature changes with each density.
The word density is appropriate and useful. However, more accurate is the term harmonic inclusiveness. So what you refer to as a density is the number of harmonics that are sustained at each node. And as the number of
that makes a lot of sense.
Which defines the number of axes of spin symmetry that are superposed at each node, literally the amount of compression. And that literally then defines how many golden ratio multiples times the speed of light are propagating in the array from that point, how far the Stargate can go from that point. Few people know that in the extensive measurements of faster than light velocities from Professor Raymond Chow, they all centered around 1.618 times the speed of light. Hello, that's a smoking gun. Not only the cause of gravity, but the mechanism of the array. So, you know, we know a lot more about what the next dimension is. And that's why the more still you can get at a compression node, the number of axes of spin symmetry that are superposed. And that's like dying in a lightning bolt, you know. To inhabit a lightning bolt non-destructively, ask, you know, the near-death experiencers, ask Kundalini experiencers, is literally experience compression in the array. That's connectivity.
I've been working on a design for a chamber based on the science of biogeometry that would actually increase the charge density, what Dr. Abraham Karim refers to as the BG3, which in my eyes is the same thing.
Yeah, I think I interviewed him about negative green. I don't think he knows how capacitors work, actually. And actually, the reason negative green is negative.
He's describing a capacitor. He's describing an asymmetrical capacitor.
Yeah, and interesting, Wilhelm Reich didn't know what a capacitor was, and neither did Steiner. And so they all.
I know Dr. Abraham Karim doesn't see how his science and understanding can be applied to electrical engineering and field geometries. But I've been working on a chamber that does just that, and eventually further down the road with different renditions of the prototype, I'm seeing the ability of designing my own holographic medbed.
Well, and, you know, that's what Therify.net is actually, and what the Integratron was. And, you know, phase conjugation enables that still point call time reversal, which actually is simply return to neg entropy. So all paths lead to the same Rome in that case. But
my ultimate goal for the first rendition of the chamber is basically just to control astral projection and sight into the further densities, because like you've been describing, you've been talking about lucid dreaming ability and all that stuff. I cannot lucid dream. I've only achieved it one time randomly, and within seconds of becoming lucid, I woke up and I am not able to control the ability to astral project on command. It happens randomly. And
Yeah.
most of the time I wake back up back in my body within 15, 20 seconds afterwards.
I think if you worked at training a little bit to move from beta toward gamma in EEG coherence, you'd find that transition point.
That's what I've been
Yeah.
trying to do. It's just trying to find the right practice to implement for
Well,
myself.
originally it was called.
That's why I was asking you earlier, what are the specific techniques that you're aware of to implement this?
In the flameandmind.com, of course, you get alpha coherence, and then beta should be golden ratio to the alpha, and that is a breathing phenomenon, which you yourself said. But the reason it was called Tibetan gamma, why they got to 44 hertz, that is a very active, high frequency brainwave mental state, and probably your lower deltas have to be stable before you can climb that ladder. And interestingly, also, you need both an octave and a golden ratio component, because you can't assemble Star Mother kit.
You need 2 points of a capacitor. You're basically building a psychological capacitor.
Well, implosive capacitor, but specifically, the array of those tensors in your brainwaves, the octave components is like the tetracube unpacking, like Flower of Life, which is the crystallizing stabilizer, and then the dodeca Icosa golden ratio components are the implosive. And when both are present, then the kids see without their eyes. And when both are present at high amplitude, John Charles bilocated with witnesses. He got into that array, actually, which is the extension of lucid dreaming, actually, with simply more charge density. So the
referring to the capacitor implosion, what I have noticed in electrical technology is that symmetrical capacitors are very harmful, explosive, transverse energy forms, while it's the asymmetrical capacitors that are able to link with the force lines of gravity and of higher dimensions.
It's a particular kind of asymmetry, which would be called conjugate, actually.
Yeah.
So it's recursive asymmetry. And that brings us to one of the questions from Sarah here. Would transverse waves be considered centrifugal? Well, actually, here's something we can say from Tom Bearden's equations. When he proved that the gravity waves are longitudinal EMF, it's actually obvious, because only the compressional component could implode at center. Because if the transverse is arriving, it's not going to create centripetal compression. No way. So transverse waves are the opposite of centripetal. We can say that. Whether they're centrifugal or not necessarily, but they're certainly not centripetal. It's why, for example, the first atomic device was named implosion, because only the longitudinal component was compressive enough to reach critical mass, and why Earth grid magnetic line cross points so measurably reduce nuclear critical mass, as Bruce Cathy measured. So there was another question from Sarah here. I wonder how many of us experience crooked Kundalini awakens because of attacks on our own spine. Well, I was with Bob Dratch when he measured Wendy's spine liquid in the microwave, and we measured Kundalini in the microwave. We now know what that was. That was the 1.91 angstrom adenosine diphosphate triphosphate bond, which is precisely phase conjugate to Planck and implosive. So if you scan the body from that, it's much more accurate than any hospital scanner, until the US military declared that a threat to national security for poor Bob Dratch. But the point was, you could measure Kundalini in the microwave because it measured metabolic activity, ADP to ATP. And that tells you something. It tells you it's simply the density of flame. Literally metabolic density. And as the geometry of flame becomes fractal, recursive, implosive, like the spine liquid pump tidal harmonics are all precisely golden ratio to Planck. And if your spine liquid is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed. So the opposite of an attack is implosion. And if implosion is not present, you're susceptible to attack, obviously. So I mean, this brings up the entire question of astral hygiene, which is probably another conversation. But it boils down to, understanding how the tribal shamans set their intent, so only the right ancestors would join the conversation.
What are some of the techniques, Dan? Can you some practical techniques for the layman to initiate that memory?
Well, for inducing, remember, people can't make alpha are generally boring. And 90% of our civilization today has put themselves in an environment where alpha is unavailable because the Schumann resonance do not get to 99% of humans on this planet today because of thick rubber sneakers and poisonous steel buildings full of electrosmog. So because the Schumann resonance cannot penetrate to 99% of humans on this planet, those same 99% of humans do not have alpha available. Oh dear, like DNA radio has been permanently disconnected. Oops. So, when Luke Skywalker went to raise the Jedi, he went deep into nature. That's a bit of a clue. And then
you really remind me of right now is in the movie They Live, there's a guy who goes on TV and he's trying to explain to everybody, like they take over the TV waves for a little bit. He's trying to explain to everybody that they're putting us into a beta brainwave state that resembles sleep to hypnotize us. And you're talking about how they're trying to keep us out of this alpha brainwave state. And I almost wonder if, like, the frequencies, what's coming out of our televisions, what's coming out of our cell phones, what have you, has to do with interfering with this alpha frequency that we're being kept out of.
Exactly. Yes. And the
I do know the more I use my phone, the harder it is to meditate. So that makes a lot of sense. To me.
Yeah. The Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth is particularly poisoned. Those square waves. It's bad news. So basically, step one is try a cabin in the woods for a week. Step one.
Oh God, I would love that. I've needed that for so long.
Or we should
That's why a lot of the ancient priests used caves. They put themselves in complete sensory deprivation.
Yeah. Hundreds of humans on this planet prove they can live to be hundreds of years old, and ain't one of them done it in a modern building. Every one of them did it in a cave. Is that a clue?
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, but so that's called embedding. It means that, a Faraday cage may help for a short term, but ultimately the solution is not isolation. It's perfect embedding, which actually defines perfected entanglement, which is connection.
Which is proof that there's no such thing as a closed system.
Exactly. It's embeddability that ultimately enables.
The more separated from the system you become, the more dead or closer to death you become.
That's right. That's why charge distribution efficiency is the definition of heaven, or fractal field. So, Alex, are you muted?
No, I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. There's
a here if they wanted to Galaxy S20. If you want to introduce yourself while you're here, in curiosity, Eve. I know Eve, you wanted to be on here. Maybe you're having a mechanical issue, and I know Sibet probably would just like to remain. Where she is there, but if anybody else wants to share that hasn't spoken, please feel free to do so. Or otherwise,
yeah, Eve or Galaxy, did you have any questions or comments here? Maybe the fact that
they're muted right now. They might have to
No, Eve is not muted.
Oh, she isn't. Okay.
Hi there. I'm having some difficulties, so I do apologize for that.
Go ahead. Did you have a question or comment?
No, I've just been listening while I'm trying to get everything situated so I can settle down and turn everything on right now. But I'm interested in a lot of what you're talking about when it comes to Indigenous, being Indigenous myself. Mm-hmm. I find it interesting when other non-Indigenous people speak about it. So I'm just listening for right now.
Well, we think that, for example, about 90% of those who were abducted by the Naboo Greys after the Greada Treaty had some Indigenous blood, meaning they had some lucid dreaming ability, meaning having walked for hundreds of generations barefoot on the same song line, the DNA became more fractal to the land, meaning, for example, in Australia, the songline dreaming track, that magnetic line across the continent literally became a family pet. And the storm that went down that song line across the continent when Auntie Lorraine died, the family pet was a magnetic line the size of a continent, actually. And that coherence with respect to that magnetic array is kind of the same reason that, the Hopi blue corn would only germinate if you sang the right song. That DNA was a family pet, actually, and had genetic diversity and was self-aware plasma. And that connection, that embedding, actually perfect grounding, kind of defines indigenous ensoulment, really. And that's the tragedy of our age, that the indigenous people knew how to teach their young people how to have a bliss experience. And they knew that that was the definition of culture, because that determined who had a soul and who took memory through death. Please, let's convince our government.
The way I understand what you're referring to, as far as the song lines and the connection we have to them, is that the DNA of our bodies has a memory. As we pass it on, that DNA memory does pass on, and that memory is in the form of genes that are either on or off. And the closer we are to resonating with a particular song line on the earth, our genes are more turned on for connecting with those energies of that song line. It's a sympathetic resonance. And the further we are away from that in our modern day society, you can't be any further away from it than that. We are literally today passing on genes that would have connected us further to the earth, but are turned off right now.
Yeah, and
because of our disconnected to those song lines.
And if we want to have a description that would appeal to a genetic engineer, for example, more detail, agreeing completely with what you just said, more detail would be that the coherent phonon cascade, literally a phase conjugate pump wave of a heart or brain wave in bliss, we measured imploding the DNA braid recursively, the presence of the enzyme responsible for the zipper, goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. So what's happening is the active sites are being aligned by the phonon recursive braiding process. Literally, the plot thickens, and that determines which sites are available to the RNA and to replicate. So what switches on and off is the mechanics of the phonon of coherent emotion, which we have measured is the mechanism of braiding, which is the programmer. So another way of saying that is, if you didn't get access to bliss, ain't nobody steering your DNA toward implosion.
Which tells me that it is capable of reversing that process and turning things back on, but it requires connecting back to the earth, and not simply the earth, but specifically strong, resonating song lines,
Yes.
grid lines,
Yes,
of energy and groundedness.
Yes, exactly.
And
access to the breathing technique,
sympathetic resonation with that.
and the trance
With that
techniques.
particular line over and over repeatedly will turn that back on. And then you will be able to pass those back on genes to your next generation and next and next. And then down the road, if they fall away from that again, they'll start again passing on genes that are turning off more and more with each passing generation.
And there's the role of the bliss dance, the sacred gymnastic, the tensegrity. That's all access to that charge implosion. Actually, it's literally charge density that implodes and braids and programs. I think Sarah wanted to say something. Did you, Sarah?
Let's see where my stream of consciousness was. Oh, I was just, I'm excited about lucid dreaming actually in this topic, and how, what we could do, as a network in that space in terms of mission work and healing and things like that.
Exactly. And when we can lucid dream as a group and then go through the heart of the sun as a group, and in the lucid dream, if you look at your hand, that tightens the do loop of recursive compression, and that compression enables the lucid dreaming because it enables longitudinal propagation. So the techniques for lucid dreaming are well known, well taught in yoga, but to understand that that is the major symptom of who will take memory through death and ensoulment. And now that we know that longitudinal coherence, Therify.net plasma, triggers lucid dreaming, and we know why, and we know the relationship to that coherent propagation to remote viewing and astral projection, why there can be alarms for remote viewers at Area 51 because it's a compression moment in the plasma, you know. So this is all a teachable science, and we formed the luciddreamteam.com for that reason, and there's teams forming on Telegram there now. And this is about understanding that our species as a whole gets a redemptive possibility in the same way that a beehive cannot swarm until the royal blood is present, because who can steer? The navigator. So, you know, royal blood was a name for someone who had access to enough bliss to be charged radiant. I'm sorry, Charles, I don't think you qualify. I don't want to pick on the poor guy. But
My understanding of royal blood from the programs, understand refer to programs referring to the SSP. What they are taught is that there is a second species of human on Earth called Homo capensis. And Homo sapien is a hybridized version of a local human primate, a local Earth primate, and Jahami. The particular Jahami whose DNA was successfully able to propagate with the local primate was actually Inky, who happens to be a half-breed of half Jahami and half Draconian white royal.
yeah, the
And
white
and that is why we have reptilian parts of our brain. So Homo sapien is half local Earth primate, 25% Jahami, 25% Draconian. But there was a further later on, Homo sapien was created to be a worker species, to mine the resources of Earth, because Jahami find the nitrogen in Earth's atmosphere toxic. It shortens their lifespan. Even with their life extending technology, it shortens their lifespan. And so they created a management species called Homo capensis, which they took human and then further hybridized, so they're more Jahami. And that is literally the descendancy of all of the Illuminati, all of the kings and queens and priests of Earth. They are descended of Homo capensis, which is actually red-headed giants, is what Homo capensis is.
And that actually fits Lawrence Gardner's Genesis of the Grail King perfectly, but it leaves out one point, that actually what you're calling the ancestors of the royal blood, he identified correctly as being the kind of the Jesus myth. But when we understand that Jesus story comes out of the Essenes, which is the Egyptian royal blood, which is actually Thutmosis, which is actually Thoth, which is
Thoth the Atlantean, who Thoth was a Homo capensis.
Exactly. Well,
if you study the ancient Egyptian pictographs,
so we're agreeing,
and you see the picture of Thoth.
Yeah.
When you test the what is now degraded images of Thoth, you test the part where his hair was, you find red pigment.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And you see that he's 3 times the height of all the worker people. He was a red-headed giant. He was a Homo capensis,
and the
who survived Atlantis.
The 9-foot-tall giant skeletons at Zor Valley and at Wollumbin in Australia, they all fit that story perfectly. Now, Elena says that Thoth is in stasis below Florida, the 9-foot-tall, and so actually all of these stories fit together perfectly. But the point is that, so what is the average person on Earth to say now? Well, oh, was I bred to be just a slave? Remember, the propagation of what at that time was called royal blood has propagated through the species to the extent that
it's watered down. That's why the royal species today, the royals, are the same height as we are.
Well, yeah,
They're
that's right.
watered down. And this is
But-
why they interbreed so much. Is because
Yeah,
they're trying
that's
to
right.
keep that higher telepathic ability,
But-
those higher psionic abilities that Homo capensis had
But remember that
in their
hygiene,
genomes.
the hygiene we're teaching now for people who have any part, and most people do have some part of that, the Thoth story bloodline, the Grail blood. It's
Yeah.
all the Grail blood is
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about. In Genesis of the Grail Kings, it's all the same story. That many, if not most, have the capability of getting on the path of bliss once they understand the science. And the science of accreting charge is teachable, what they call the quality of grace, actually. So suddenly this is not an exclusive club anymore. It's actually a share.
What I understand is that there is a tribe of people called the Merovingians.
Yeah,
And-
9 foot tall, red haired.
And that tribe of people, well, no, the Merovingians are descended. They all claim to be descended of Jesus.
And
of-
they
of
had red
Joshua.
hair, and they called themselves the
And
tribe
they
of
had
the
red
busy
hair.
bees. Yeah.
Because Jesus himself, the man we call Jesus, whose mother called him Joshua,
Yes.
the J just didn't exist in the vocabulary then in the alphabet, but it was
Yeah.
Joshua. What he was the latest rendition in adding more ET-DNA into the human populace.
Well,
He was the newest, freshest blood.
if you read Secret
Royal
Links of the
blood.
Lion, the Syrians planned for 300 years for the bloodline descended from Akhenaten to Tutankhamun, and that's what became the Essene royal blood, which is what became Jesus. All of those stories fit together perfectly, no question.
Right. Right.
But the issue it remains is the lesson of Thoth, the caduceus phase conjugation, the lesson of Jesus become the cherub wave. There are many mansions in heaven. The return is the return of the Christ scientist. In other words, that what makes
I find that the Christians have bastardized his
Yeah,
teachings so
course.
much and have misinterpreted and literally changed the wording. If you go into the original Aramaic and even the Latin and Greek translations maintain the original meaning. When there was a point when Jesus said, "Don't you know that you are all gods?"
Yeah.
But when it was
the-
translated to English, it was changed, "Don't you know that you all belong to God?"
and the Aramaic
Which is a
Lord's
complete
Prayer-
false translation.
And the Aramaic Lord's Prayer is another perfect example. You're completely right about that. But then remember that all of these discussions return to, do we have a real science of spirituality? Do we have a real science of bliss? That's the only, and then the nightmare that was history.
That's been my
Yeah.
approach to
Yeah.
studying spiritualism my whole life. Since I was a kid, I've begged, just screamed out to the universe, begged for, back then I was a Christian. I left because of my greater scientific development into spirituality
That's great.
and
Well,
greater understanding. And that's been my development approach my whole life.
Well, that's
is
great.
developing a
Let's-
scientific understanding.
Let's just, we're going to run out of time here. Let's just see if
Ah.
we can go down the questions here. Thank you so much, though, Matt. You're right on about everything. But the questions in the chat window, hello from New York City. Can those who live in big cities and high-rise buildings tune into high frequencies by just visualizing that they are in nature, or just to keep the state of bliss? I'd like to make one point. When in St. Petersburg, they famously taught the kids to see without their eyes, and the kids had to go into a trance bliss state before they could. The instruction they gave the kids was, visualize that you're in beautiful nature now. And then they would flip a switch inside and they'd go into this trance bliss state. Which was useful and powerful and effective, but I want to make a point. You can do that for a while, but to sustain bliss in a poisonous metal building, it's like the first time you give the baby the pacifier, it thinks there's milk in there and it will smile. But the second time, there's no milk in the damn Armox. So eventually you're going to need access to the real Schumann and not the pacifier. But still, visualizing nature is a good first step. And the Mayer wave 10-second breath is also very helpful. Next question. Speaking of Egypt, this phenomena of ancient sacred languages coming through the inner eye vortex fascinates me. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Hebrew, Sanskrit, Phoenician, are they providing codes that are transforming us somehow? Just a fun story. So when Bob Dratch first showed that we could measure Kundalini in the ADP 1.91 angstrom microwave, a spine liquid scan, then he turned that microwave scanner, horn gun, gold cross. Microwave amps are the way to study ceremonial magic, by the way. Anyway, he then shined that on horizon and proved this is the perfect dowsing tool, scanning the grid for living human microwave 1.91 angstroms. Well, in other words, the Earth grid is profoundly symbiotic to exactly the microwave of human bliss. Well, then he found out something else, which was that, remember I said if you study microwave amplifiers, you learn a lot about ceremonial magic. So he studied the carvings on the pyramid walls and discovered the insects were navigating by the radiance from the stone carvings because of their microwave emission. You know, Callahan proved that microwave radiance was the physics of insect antenna. So suddenly all the spectrum of human bliss becomes part of that. So yes, the Egyptians knew, but you know who that was? That was Thoth.
Phil, Dan, could I ask you, does that apply also, that insect anomaly transmission? Is that respectful also to their higher dimensional counterparts, meaning the mantoids and maybe even the chromaton?
Very good, yes. So, you know, Phil Callahan's work was beautiful. It's from him I learned why the hummingbirds always crashed into the window of the sealed house in the winter when anyone inside had bliss, because they smelled it, because the flowering brain of bliss radiates the infrared of bliss that goes right through the window, and the hummingbird are right on track to so insect antenna or profound microwave and infrared antenna, and more evolved insectoid species like the mantids, who are famous for astral etheric surgery, for example. So that fits the story perfectly. Yes, thank you.
I've connected with a few. I just a quick on the insects thing. You can actually measure the energy output of a bee colony with a weight and pendulum. It will actually be lighter above the colony than it is anywhere else around or below it.
And there's a lot of literature about people who learned, who were sick. They learned to sleep over a bee hive, and it healed all kinds of diseases. It has a gravity component. Well said. And Sarah asks, when animals start to circle, like at Stonehenge, if you've ever seen the animals circle around Stonehenge, do they know something?
Oh, yeah.
So, Alex,
Did you want to
say again?
I would just want to speak. I was speaking to Eve. Eve, did you want to share anything?
I was just waiting for the chance where I had kind of come into a conversation when they were talking about being able to see with your eyes closed. This is something that I thought that everybody could do, but since I was like a little kid, I was able to just pull myself into like almost like a different higher part of my brain, and I can see even with my eyes shut everything around me. It's like comes in a very light tones of gray. And then I was told that I was just something that was because I was a very spiritual, you know, which some people say just goes to the Native Americans, but it can be anybody that can be spiritual, anybody who is not quite programmed that they do when you're first born into religion, and then you lose your spirituality along the way. That's one the control that they have here, and the reason why the Native Americans are not like that is because we refuse to, most of us, I'm not saying all of us, refuse to be able to program with the religiousness that they were using to control the masses. So I don't believe that, you know, I don't believe our stories. and one day I'd like to be able to sit down, Dan, and talk to you, but some of the stories that I was brought up on are very, very close to, I guess, what people talk about when they talk about the Bible. I've never read it. I've read parts of Genesis, and that's about it, but I couldn't get through it. And they explain almost the exact same detail, but I'm able to see with, and I think it has some sort of transitioning up into like the third eye and being able to see around me with my eyes shut. But it was something because I was terrified of the dark, but I was more terrified of the nightlight that my mother put there for me, because I would see different shadows and forms, and I didn't like that.
Me
either,
too.
so.
And so
That's very common in my family.
what native tribe are you related to? What?
Originally we came from Ontario into Canada and down into Minnesota. But I think the government calls us Chippewa, but we don't call ourselves Chippewa. We call ourselves Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, which is people that are, I had it translated as light lowered from the stars. So
I love it.
definitely not from here.
What beautiful, perfect. And they like the Iroquois, they had a legend of the great blonde-haired, blue-eyed Quetzalcoatl Viracocha, return of the bird tribe, Adawi. Those legends were all, and there's a connection to the Thoth story in much of that as well, which is exactly, and the Thoth story, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, however you want to name, they were profoundly interested in the indigenous tribes. In fact, going around between the indigenous tribes was the primary activity of the reason, because the recipe for soul was still alive among the indigenous. They could see those song lines. So, amen. We're glad you're here.
One thing to confirm what you just said, Dan, in South America, the god Tejote,
Yes.
spell it out. It's Thoth.
So there you go. Everywhere you turn, Graham Hancock did.
Tejote is Thoth.
Everywhere Graham Hancock turned, he said, somebody came and tried to save civilization. He gave 10 examples, and they're all names for Thoth.
Exactly.
I think what we call Gitchi Manidu, which is Gitchi means great. And Manidu, we talk about Manidus, seeing Manidus when we're children, are like ghosts.
Oh, yes. And
so the great ghost,
ghost,
I guess would be translated into whatever you'd like to be, want to say, but it's almost like we call it the creator, Gitchi Manidu. That's it's the great one.
I've heard some tribes call the creator of all grandfather.
Great spirit,
which I personally feel is most accurate for the way how I see the creator of all that is.
It's good, and the Zulu had the name Kiliman, as in Kilimanjaro. So it all seems to go back to this, this care that our species would develop a soul, and that's really our task, to understand that scientifically in terms of what charge does to implode DNA via bliss. It's good. It's good. My voice is starting to give out here, but is there anything else that needs to happen before we finish? Thank you so much, Eve. That was beautiful what you shared. Really.
Yeah, if you could talk about a little bit about your continuing classes that you're offering on Sunday at 2 p.m. EST, etc. Any kind of apprenticeship work you're doing to understand these sacred mechanics. Thank you. Or anyone else.
Our last presentation of fractalu.com will be this coming Sunday, tomorrow, 2 p.m. New York time. And this is on bliss in heart coherence, heart rate variability, and deep sleep analysis. Enabling access to the deep sleep is what enables access to lucid dreaming, obviously, in heart rate variability studies, iThrive.com. And this will be ongoing in other forms, the lucid dream team, etc. So to be announced. We just last week we did the announcement of my new book, plankfire.com, PLANCKPHIRE, plankfire.com.
I have a quick thing. One of the things that we do when we go on our vision quest, especially if we go along the Medea way, which is the medicine way, and being a medicine man or woman, for 3 days you go into the forest and you don't eat anything prepared You eat from the land. If you do eat anything, you drink water, you don't bring anything with you, and you're out there for 3 days on your own. And the whole thing is to stay awake as long as you can. And then you start to astral dream, but with your eyes open. But one of the things is the fasting is very important for lucid dreaming. So I think by rule, I usually don't try to eat after 7:30. I've had many, I thought that it was very common, but like emptying out your stomach before you go to sleep is like one of the best things. Try to stay away from a lot of caffeine. You know, you can have it in the day, try to stay away from it. And
Exactly.
I've never had an issue with it ever not being able to lucid dream. And
Right.
it just, I don't know. I think I'm thinking about talking with a couple of other people that are in midday and maybe having a type of class on being able to do it the way that the Native Americans do, because we've had this knowledge for so long that it's time for everyone. And I think that it's time for everyone to start sharing and to opening up to these things that we've been able to do for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Beautiful.
I love it.
No, that's great. And you know, then the next step is to learn to lucid dream together and move as a pod, and that becomes an immune system for the whole planet.
You begin to magnify each other's energy. It's like
we have the sweat lodge,
two or more together,
and everybody comes into the sweat lodge.
Nice.
and everyone that's in there all astral dream together while awake. And that's
what I understand that as from a chemical perspective is that when you stress your body to that degree, it does release the DMT chemical that's attached to the outside of the pineal gland. And that's the chemical that allows you to see things. Runners, long distance runners that will run for hundreds of miles.
That switch. You right there, you said stress. We don't call it stress.
I know.
Those are the optimal.
I know,
conditions.
but I'm referring to in the medical community. When your body is stressed to that extent, like for runners.
We're talking.
I know. I'm just making a connection. I'm making a connection for people who don't have that background. What I'm trying to say is I'm not. Well, I'm not talking to. I'm referring to everyone listening in on this. I'm making a connection for people with other backgrounds of understanding. Is all I'm doing.
Thank you, Matt. Let's honor Eve's indigenous wisdom. You know, the indigenous people also, they used the stones of the sweat lodge were aligned to the grid as well.
Oh, and yeah.
I love
where they were picked and who they were picked by was very important.
Nice.
Women were not allowed. Women were the only ones that were allowed to bring into the placement of the sweat lodge. Not men. Men were not allowed to touch it.
Yeah,
and
it was a resonance issue with the earth.
Is the feminine that of the hierarchy of women were more considered spiritual than men were. Yeah, and that only women were allowed to touch this lodge. Only women were allowed to erect this lodge.
And they did that whole thing.
And one medicine man stayed and watched, and that was it, to make sure that everything was done correctly.
And they did that.
That's been throughout the entire history of the human race. Women are always more easily able to reach that spiritual state.
They also recognize the tremendous power of women's menstrual blood.
Oh yeah,
but also,
when women were on their moons, they were sent away, and it wasn't because they were dirty. It was because they possessed more power in their bodies within those 4 or 5 days
than the men could handle.
Anyone would be. They couldn't even sleep with their husbands because their husbands were not allowed to be around that kind of power.
And I also love your 3 days in the wilderness. The 3-day near-death experience was called the Lost Art of Resurrection, actually. And that's literally, that's how the Templars initiated, was a 3-day near-death experience as well. So these stories just fit together so beautifully. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really want to thank everybody. Thank you, Alex. And Eve, that was a very important contribution. Thank you. And Matt, you're so powerful and you're so right. It was very nice. And Sarah, it's wonderful to meet you and your perspective. Archive. Is there anybody else who wants to just say anything before we go here? Is this okay? Are we good?
I would like to point out something I'm working on. Alex mentioned I should say this to the public. I've been working on my own memorization technique that is I'm finding out from other people who I'm teaching is superior to anything else they've learned. And so I'm now teaching it. And so anybody who wants to learn what I'm now calling the Tracy method, as my name is Matthew Tracy, please hit me up. You can find me on Facebook Messenger under Matt Tracy. My email address is matthewtracy86@gmail.com. And basically has nothing, it does not do repetition at all. No mnemonics are involved. No memory palace techniques are involved. I discovered a way of unlocking certain aspects of the brain that unlocks your ability to transfer information directly into long-term memory. And this is coming from me who suffers from working memory deficit disorder, ADD, dyslexia, and Asperger's syndrome. And I developed this technique specifically to combat all of my problems there. So anybody wants to even just ask questions about it, hit me up.
Great, thank you. And thanks for arranging this, Alex. It's been a blessing.
Our comrade, did you want to mention something about you, brother, yourself?
I just want to say thanks for having on the show. Obviously, Dan has some incredible wisdom, and I really appreciate you apparently orchestrating this. I kind of just saw in the chat, hey, we're having a conversation, and I just joined, and I'm really glad I did. And yeah, also Eve, your testimony is so powerful. We all appreciate you so much. You're such a light to this community. And same thing with you, Matt. Like your testimony is great, and your way of breaking things down is, I think, helpful to a lot of people. And yeah, just thanks for having me.
Blessings. Thanks, everybody. See you again soon. Carry the vision. Thank you, Eve. Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.